Hey everyone, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. We are now on episode 4. 4 whole episodes. Yay, we're a toddler.
Woo!
I'm your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
I'm your other host, Joe, and you can find us on Instagram at Love Meets Literature.
We also have a Facebook page now, so if Instagram is not your jam, you can find us on Facebook, also at Love Meets Literature. Please give us a follow. You can find us everywhere at Love Meets Literature. So today's episode, we are going to be chatting about some of our current and recent reads. Just going to be super chill, super relaxed, get into a bunch of random stuff. I just want to know how reading is going for you.
It's been going well. I've been making good progress on the book that I'm reading this week, and then I've also dabbled into a couple of other things that we're going to talk about. How is reading going for you this week?
You know, it's going. I may have put myself into a slump again, but I've been doing a lot of reading recently. I finished up a couple of buddy reads, so that's 2 that I finished last week, and then I finished a 3rd one last week as well. So it's just a lot. It's like information overload in my brain, but that's okay. I mean, reading is my favorite hobby, and that's to be expected. So I'd say it's been a pretty good reading month. Also a pretty good book buying month. I know we both got some book mail recently.
Yes, we did.
What did you get?
I decided to buy the entire Witcher box set with the exception of one book that's not included in it. So I'm going to have to get that at a later time. And then I also got 2 cookbooks. The Basics with Babish, which is by Binging with Babish, who's a YouTuber, also known as Andrew Ray. And then I also got Claire Saffitz's Dessert Person.
That's exciting.
Yes.
I remember when we used to watch Claire Saffitz on the Bon Appetit channel.
Yeah, she used to do all the stuff in the test kitchen.
Yeah, that was fun. But now you can be the test kitchen.
I can, yes. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to making a bunch of the stuff out of there. And they're both very talented cooks. And the best part is nearly all of their recipes are also on their YouTube channel. And I like to read it and then also see it. So now I get to actually go and watch the video, and hopefully it makes the product turn out even nicer.
Well, I'm excited to eat everything.
Yes.
I'm not much of a cook myself, as we all know, but I can bake. I can bake some good cakes and desserts and cookies.
Yes, you are a good baker.
Cooking, though, not really my forte.
What about you? What did you get this week?
I bought the first 2 ACOTAR books, so A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury, because I am forcing one of my friends to read A Court of Thorns and Roses, but she will only do it if I buddy read it with her. And I figured for that, I wanted to own the actual copy, because before I just checked them all out of the library. I never owned them. So this was kind of an excuse for me to start buying them.
I mean, that's fair. They are pretty books. I like the way they look.
But I like the original covers better. I don't know if you've ever seen the original covers, but it has the people on the front of them. Well, just the one girl. And they just look prettier, in my opinion, than these ones, because these are just random artwork over a solid color.
Yeah, I think I do remember that one. She's got like white hair, I think.
No, that's the Throne of Glass series.
Oh, that's definitely what I'm thinking of.
But those are also the original covers for Throne of Glass that are now out of print. So you can't find those covers on the books now. You find some like basic other artwork. It's like the publisher's simplifying the artwork, which I don't know why, because the original so much better. But anyway, we're not talking about Throne of Glass right now. I can get into a whole can of worms with Throne of Glass because I loved it, by the way. Not that I'm not trying to like take a dig at Throne of Glass, because I loved Throne of Glass. But as for my current and recent reads, I feel like I've read a lot of good books recently. I don't think I've rated a single book under 4 stars in a while.
That's good.
It is good. So I'm reading good ones, And I joined a new book club on Instagram called Myth of the Month because I'm trying to branch out and read things that are different than what I normally read. This is a book club that's based around mythology. So they read books that are sort of a retelling or reimagining of a myth.
That's very exciting.
It sounds very cool. So I started reading the book for that. And it's pretty good so far. I'll get into that more later. But how are your current and recent reads? Are we vibing with them?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
The main book that I'm reading right now has finally got to its interesting parts, so it's very fun to read, and it makes it move way faster. Like the first 100 pages were a bit of a slow burn, and now the last or the most recent 100 pages, because I'm about 200 something in, have been like flying by. It's been happening all so fast, so it's very interesting.
Well, that's good. But before we jump into our long chat about books, we have a new segment to introduce, and one that I am very excited about because it's just going to be the most random thing ever. We're going to be talking about some Wikipedia Fun Facts, courtesy of Joe over here.
Yes, I am very excited for this. The format for this is essentially looking something up, talking about its history, how it came to be, why it exists, something along those lines. So you learn a little something. Today, the topic of focus is tacos.
Ooh, and the reason tacos came about is because we had tacos over the weekend. And I asked the question, where did tacos come from? How did they originate? And so, of course, he had to look it up.
Of course. And then I spent probably, 25 minutes reading the entire Wikipedia page, and then history of Mexican cuisine, and then the etymology of why the word taco became the word taco. It's all very interesting, actually. So let me jump into it. To start, the actual origins of the taco are not known. It's all theoretical.
Okay.
So the etymology, which is the actual formation of the word, how the word TACO, taco, came to be, is quite interesting, but also, again, up to theory right now. It's believed to come from, and I apologize, I'm going to butcher a lot of these words. I'm not a native Spanish speaker, so some of these might be a little hard to pronounce for me.
That's okay.
But it comes from, or it's believed to come from, the Nahuatl tribe, or the Nahuatl language, I should say, which was spoken by the Aztecs. There's a word pronounced tlaco, T-L-A-H-C-O, which meant half or in the middle. So the idea, you have a taco shell and you put the food in the middle.
Oh.
So it makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense.
The other theory on how the actual food taco came to be, and this one seems a little bit more logical, there's a lot more evidence around it, was that it came from Mexican silver miners. So in Mexico back in, I believe it was the 1600s, they had essentially found silver, and so a bunch of them were mining it and pulling it out and making a bunch of money off of it. They used to take paper, and inside of the mines, they would put gunpowder in it, roll it up, and then stuff it in as a plug into one of the walls to kind of blow open the wall to mine the silver. And for whatever reason, this plug was referred to as a taco because they would take the paper, put it in there, and then roll it up. Kind of more like a taquito, as we would call it, but that's what's believed where the word kind of came from.
But how did it go from being something that miners use to being a food?
That's a fantastic question. The first original mention of the word taco, at least so far that they have found, has been in an 1836 cookbook. And the name of that cookbook is New and Simple Art of Cooking, Baking, and Soft Drinks. But that was the first mention of taco de tortilla, or tortilla taco. And around this time, there was also all of these little sort of mom and pop shop taco stands that were happening all around Mexico City. And the first tacos that were introduced were minor tacos, which it was supposed to be for like tacos for miners, or minor, I believe it was taco de mineros. So the idea is that they used to have these plugs that they would roll up, and for whatever reason, and this is the part that's kind of ambiguous, when they started making tacos, they first started calling them miner tacos because they rolled them how the miners would roll them. So then eventually it just became tacos because they started adding other ingredients. So like tacos al pastor and carne asada and all these kinds of things. And so eventually it just turned into that. The other kind of interesting part to this is the origination in the US was actually in 1905. That was the first time it was ever mentioned in a newspaper. And this was introduced actually by a group of women called the Chili Queens, which I thought was a fun name. They brought tamales and tacos into Los Angeles and San Antonio and all these different places sort of down in the Southwest. And then during the 1880s and 1890s, when the railroad was booming, all the tourists came over, found it, tried it, loved it, and then they talked about it, and it sort of just expanded and blew up from there, and everybody kind of heard about them. And then after that, you get Taco Bell, essentially. It was by Glenn Bell, who was the first one to actually make or again, believed to be the first one to make the hard shell U-taco. Supposedly it was his invention.
Interesting. So tacos as we Americans know it were not actually created by the Mexican people?
Technically speaking, no. What you would imagine as what they call an American taco was completely created by Americans, by Glenn Bell. He Americanized it because it was easier on our palate. It's talked about a lot that a lot of the tourists that went to visit the Chili Queens would actually warn you that the food was too spicy to eat, so you had to be careful.
That's funny. And wow, that's actually really interesting that it sort of originated in the silver mines.
Right. So the biggest ambiguous question is sort of that distinction of when did it fully transition from being a term that a miner would use versus a term that was used in the culinary sense. So that's the only part that's really the gap, but it is still very interesting that it all seemed to happen around the same time with, again, the cookbooks in like the 1800s and early 1700s to 1800s.
Yeah, how interesting. Well, I guess I got my answer on how the name taco came to be.
Right. So the simple answer is it's believed to come from Mexican silver miners.
Wow.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, every time I eat a taco now, I'm going to think of these men in the silver mines.
Yeah, rolling up their gunpowder little plugs.
The Wikipedia rabbit hole. We've all been there.
Exactly.
I mostly fall down the Wikipedia rabbit hole with television shows and cast and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. I probably fall down at least once a week, I would say.
That's more than I fall down. So that was very interesting. We all learned something over here from our resident history buff. So now into the books. Both of my recent reads were fantasy, in the fantasy realm. I had one historical fantasy, one high fantasy. Which one would you like to hear about first?
I would like to hear about the high fantasy one first.
The high fantasy book that I recently read is called When the Moon Hatched, and it's by Sarah A. Parker. I mentioned this on a previous episode. I didn't really know how to describe it. I still don't really know how I would describe it, but I'm going to do the best I can. For starters, I did give this book 4.5 stars. It wasn't a full 5-star for me, and that was just mainly because with it being high fantasy, it had all this new terminology that my brain was trying to compute. And I literally felt like that one emoji with the swirly eyes and the squiggle mouth just like spinning.
Just completely lost in all of the different concepts.
I was, and it was fun to learn about, but at the same time, I was lost. This book, according to Goodreads, is a fast-paced fantasy romance for fans of witty banter and strong, sassy protagonists. Beneath the cover is an immersive, vibrant world with mysterious creatures, a unique magic system, and a love that blazes through the ages. So that is a very brief what it's about, because if I were to give you the entire synopsis, you probably would not even understand half the words I would be saying.
Yeah, that tends to happen with high fantasy.
So this book has sort of been compared to ACOTAR and Throne of Glass. I can see where people get the Throne of Glass comparison because both books do have okay, now this might be a spoiler alert if you haven't read Throne of Glass, so close your ears if you haven't read it yet. But both books have a female assassin who don't remember who they are. In When the Moon Hatched specifically, now this is probably going to be another spoiler, you've been warned. The main character, her name is Rave, and she is a female assassin, as previously stated. And she had a past identity that she doesn't remember.
This sounds very familiar to the Throne of Glass of what I've heard.
Yes, it is. So I got that vibe, but I loved Throne of Glass, so I really enjoyed this book, but I don't really get the ACOTAR comparison with this one. I think people are just saying it compares to ACOTAR because it does have the romantasy aspect, but there is so much more to ACOTAR than romantasy, just like there is so much more to this book than romantasy. Now, romantasy, if you're not familiar, is romance and fantasy combined. So, I mean, overall, I enjoyed it. It did include fae and a bunch of fantastical creatures, and it did have a unique concept of when dragons die, they turn into moons and live in the sky. Like their graves are in the sky as moons.
That's very interesting.
Very interesting. And Rave, okay, again, spoiler for this book. I mentioned she had a past life that she doesn't remember. And she doesn't really remember it because she ended up being formed into a moon with her dead dragon. So she was up in the sky in a little moon grave for years. This book is called When the Moon Hatched because Rave somehow broke out of the moon.
So does she fall in love with a dragon
No.
or a person?
She falls in love with another person, not a dragon.
I just figured high fantasy. You never know.
I mean, yeah, you never know. I mean, these people seem to have like quote unquote pet dragons. I wouldn't really call them their pets though. I mean, they like care for them and stuff and they like use them as a mode of transportation.
Is it more like a companion, like you would like a horse?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But this book, very hard for me to describe because there was a lot. It was like 700 pages of stuff that I didn't fully understand. But at the same time, I was so fascinated with it that I have a very vague understanding of events.
I think that's kind of what happens a lot of times with high fantasy, though, is you start to draw, you get intrigued with the concepts and it kind of pulls you more in. I'm very curious on what their unique magic system was, though. Is that the part where we get kind of lost in the terms?
Yes, very much so. And that's the reason why I want to reread this book, but get it in print so I can take notes. I think I was lost because I was reading the ebook, the Kindle version, and I couldn't easily flip back to the glossary of terms. So this author does include a glossary of terms in this book. She includes characters, who they are, how they're related. She includes creatures, what they are, what they do. She also included just some other general terms of this world that she made. So I feel like if I could have easily flipped back to that, I would have understood a lot more of what was happening. But I mean, overall, I did get the gist of it. Like this girl, I don't really recall how she became an assassin, but she basically hatched from the sky. It's like this fallen moon or whatever. And she crawled out of it because it cracked, obviously, like an egg. Just think of an egg, like Humpty Dumpty, basically.
I wonder, now that you've said that, I wonder if there's more parallels to Humpty Dumpty. That would be funny. Did they put the moon back together?
Someone's trying to put it back together.
That's actually so funny. I wonder now, again, if you reread it, if there's like a parallel to the old stories or something like that.
I don't know. But the more I'm talking about it right now, the more I am remembering, like, yes, this moon fell from the sky, which isn't supposed to happen. The moons which are the dragon graves,
Right.
are supposed to stay in the sky. And if one falls, it's like catastrophic. This moon with Rave in it fell from the sky. She broke out, and I have no idea how she became an assassin. That part kind of like flew over my head. I don't even know if it was accurately explained. I might have to spark notes this book just so I remember.
That's fair. Now, was there at least witty banter?
There was. Rave was a very witty person. I enjoyed her personality.
Well, that's good.
Obviously, there is a male main character who he acts like he wants nothing to do with her, but he actually really cares for her because he knew her in her past life. So he knows who she is, but she doesn't know who she is.
That makes sense.
The whole thing was so intriguing, and like I was obsessing over it, but at the same time, so much information.
Did he have dark hair?
I think so.
There just seems to be a weird trend lately of girls being obsessed with guys with dark hair in books.
Well, you should be glad that you have dark hair.
Yeah, I saw the trend and I was like, well, I guess I'm lucky. Sorry to all the blonde kings out there.
Yes, but I mean, I absolutely did no justice just now with When the Moon Hatched, describing it. Just know that it is high fantasy. It is very fast paced. I will say Goodreads got that right. I was flying through it. The chapters are very short and the banter makes it go fast. There's a lot of witty dialogue. The characters are great. I had no complaints about them. It's just the world was a lot.
Is this part of a series?
It's going to be. Number
Okay.
2, from my knowledge, a title has not been announced for it yet.
That actually makes a lot more sense then, because there's usually with especially high fantasy, you do have to do a lot of like world building and foundation setting.
Yes. So I feel like book 2 will probably move a lot faster for me now that I kind of understand this world. I'm still going to have to reread this book before I read that one, though.
Well, that's fair.
That was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. Now, is there anything that you have recently read or anything that you are currently reading that you found particularly interesting?
Well, besides the Wikipedia articles, I have been reading The Time of Contempt by, I can't pronounce his name, it's Polish, but it's the Witcher series. It's been very good. I talked about it on the last episode where the books tend to have this big bell curve of build up, and then once it hits its peak, it just becomes like a roller coaster ride down, and it's very fun and action packed and intense. This book kind of subverted my expectations quite a bit, where it had the build up that I was expecting, and then it came down hard and fast, but that was at like page 150 out of 300. And then all of a sudden it sort of it bottomed out and then started building up again. And now somehow that buildup is almost more exciting because now I'm getting ready for the other one to come down. From my understanding, it might happen in the next book. Even if it does, this book has already been so interesting and it's changed the world that The Witcher is in so much. Like very huge, heavy plot points have happened. So it's been extremely fun. The one thing I will say is that this book introduced a huge number of characters, like a ridiculous amount. It went from you needed to know like 5 people at most: Geralt, Yennefer, Dandelion, and Ciri. That was pretty much it. And now there's so many people. There's like 12 wizards that they introduce, just part of one council or something like that. Then there's another like 10 people you get introduced to, all of the kings, a bunch of these other sort of side characters to explain plot points. So besides that, if you can keep up with the 40 characters you get introduced to, it's been fantastic. And all of them are relevant to the story. There's things that happen between everybody, but just so many.
One of my book icks is having too many characters.
Yeah, this definitely, like, by the end of one of the chapters, I sort of was like over it. I'm like, okay, we can stop bringing in new, because it kept doing this thing where it would like jump to a different perspective. So it would have like, it would essentially jump to like these guardsmen that were somewhere, and it was supposed to explain what was happening on that front or that area. And then it would jump to another set of people. but it wouldn't just leave it at the people. The author had to give them names and give them emotions and feelings, and it would give backgrounds on people. And on one hand, it's great storytelling, and it really got you to understand what was happening at those places. And then on the other hand, it's like, I'm never going to see this guy again, or at least I don't think I'm going to. It really doesn't seem like it applies. So there's a little, back and forth there.
Multiple points of view can be fun.
The actual narrative is sort of a third person omniscient, is I believe what they call it. So it's like the narrator is talking from a third person perspective, but they know everything that's happening.
Yeah, the narrator is sort of in the head of all of the characters.
Right, exactly. So there is a little bit of that. There is also sometimes the narrator will pull back or the author will just not share as much information. And I kind of like it because it lets you be a little bit suspicious of certain people or confused about a situation, but in a good way where like you don't quite understand what's happening and then it gets explained later. So I think that's quite interesting. But yeah, I'm very excited to finish this book and then go on to the next one.
And you won't have to check it out of the library this time.
No, I got the very pretty box set along with the 2 prequel short stories that have an all matching spine. So it looks really good.
Yeah, it looks really cool. So I also recently read a book that had many points of view. And I touched on this one a little bit last episode, but it is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. And you know how we were like, oh, we don't know when this time period in Spain was? You were like, it's probably the 11 or 1200s. And I was like, no, it has to be the 1800s, which are very wildly different time periods. This one actually takes place in 16th century Spain surrounding the Spanish Inquisition. And the Spanish Inquisition happened around the 1400s. So we were both incorrect.
Yeah, a little bit off.
Yes, but that's okay. It makes a whole lot more sense now that I know what time period this book takes place in. I actually looked it up right after that episode. This one is a historical fantasy. It did take place during the Spanish Inquisition, as I just said. And during this time, anything surrounding magic was forbidden, and it was seen as the devil's work. But the people who could perform little miracles, as they so called them, saw it as God's work. So this book is basically about Lucia, who is a scullion maid, and she is able to perform these so-called little miracles. But her mistress, who is her boss, but back in the 16th century, your boss, if you were a maid, was called your mistress or your master. She found out that Lucia was able to do these little magic tricks that they are so called. And she starts using her to better her and her husband's social status. Because now, even though the Spanish Inquisition was like, we don't condone any magic, the people of Spain found it very fascinating when people could perform miracles. But because of Lucia's household, word gets to the king's secretary about her, and she is therefore entered into a tournament with other people who can perform these little miracles to see who will be the king's champion. Which I feel like that's another very old school term, being a king's champion, because in Back to Throne of Glass, there was a competition of who would be the king's champion and basically work for the king's militaries and be the best out of all of them, basically.
Yeah, it's definitely like actually it's perfectly placed because I was going to say 16th century medieval sort of concept, a king's champion.
Yes, so that's what she is entered into this tournament for. You're probably wondering, well, what little miracles can Lucia perform? She can do a lot of things. She can make flowers grow. She can make candles go out without blowing air onto them. She can turn burnt bread into a perfect loaf. She can make more sugar when the supply is running low. She can also split a man in half. And she even, once in the book, split her own tongue in half.
That's quite the jump from like manipulating some bread and putting out candles to splitting people in half.
It is, but it happened because she was very upset about something that happened. And so, this song that she basically says under her breath to make these miracles happen, it got all convoluted and whatnot and made something horrible happen instead of something good.
That's interesting. So the miracles, they don't follow like a path or a theme, sort of?
It didn't seem so, but she did have sort of her own mental catalog of these refrains that basically were passed down to her in her family, and she would use those when she wanted to perform a miracle. So I guess the wrong refrain came out wrong and she split a man in half.
That's very interesting. I actually like that concept a lot. It reminds me of like old school sort of magic where they literally had to say a spell, as where now there's always a theme, like somebody's a fire mage or a ice mage or something.
I think you would enjoy this book because even though it does seem to be like a super tough concept to wrap your mind around, because I mean, it was for me at first, it does start to make a lot of sense the more you get into it. And the author's writing is just also so beautiful and she has so much imagery in it. Whereas you're reading it, you're just like, wow, wow, wow. Like that was my reaction every page I read. And it's definitely also a book that I want to reread just because, again, so much amazing information that I just want to soak it all up again.
This definitely sounds interesting. I'm going to have to add this one to the TBR.
You will need to read it. I just returned it to the library, so they should have a copy.
Can go snag it up myself.
You should. It's amazing. And I've been wanting to actually get more into Leigh Bardugo's books after I read this one, because this was my first one by her. I am trying to find out a good place to start with that, because some people say to start with her Six of Crows series, and some people say to start with Ninth House, but it also depends on what kind of vibe you're looking for. So I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'll figure it out.
True. Are those also like historical fantasy?
No. So this one was her first historical fantasy, and it was very, very well done. Like, I would have never guessed that she hadn't written historical fantasy before because it was so well researched. I actually felt like I was in 16th century Spain running from the Inquisition. And the ending of this book also wrapped up so nicely. I got all the closure that I wanted.
That's very good. That bumped it up on my list a little bit. I love good closed endings.
Because it gave you closure on not just your main character, Lucia. It gave you closure on nearly every character that was mentioned in this book. And it's not like 40 characters like your Witcher book just was, so you're not getting just pages and pages of closure on every character. She takes the main characters and gives you what happens to them, basically.
That's good. I like that.
So that was The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I highly recommend if you enjoy historical fiction and you enjoy fantasy. It's a very, very well done blend of the genres. So I saw you the other day sitting and reading one of your cookbooks.
Yes, I started reading the Basics with Babish cookbook.
I know most people, when they get a cookbook, they don't actually sit and read the cookbook. They just flip to the recipe and make the recipe. So maybe just, can you explain why you're reading a cookbook front to back?
Well, I think that's a fair question. The whole Basics with Babish series is supposed to be a way to start with the basics of cooking. And he actually explains in the book that the original YouTube series that he had started, also called Basics with Babish, started off as a linear process where you were supposed to watch episode 1, then 2, then 3, etc. But it quickly evolved due to the way YouTube works, where a lot of people don't like to watch things in a series. They like to watch individual bites and pieces. So the book was his way of finally going back to the roots of the original formula and writing it in a progressingly difficult way. And now he also mentions this. It's not to be exactly one-to-one, like recipe 2 is harder than recipe 1. It's supposed to be more the concepts that you might use on recipe 15 are going to be utilized or started in recipe 2 or 3. Like that's where you'll learn how to do something. And then it's just assumed by 15, you know how to do it now. The whole beginning of the book is obviously this explanation, but then he also goes into this really cool breakdown of every single one of the items, like all of your different kitchen items and what they're used for, all of the different spices and what they taste like and how you use them and why they're relevant to certain recipes and all this kind of stuff. It's quite interesting. He even talks about like different oils, and I learned that extra virgin olive oil can actually get spoiled rather quickly, much quicker than people expect. So if you ever have something that seemingly tastes really gross for some reason and you used oil, it might have been bad oil.
That's something I did not know. I didn't think oil could go bad.
Right. Other than, you know, being left out or getting like dust in it or something, other than actual debris, I didn't realize that it could go rancid.
How is someone getting dust in their bottle of olive oil?
I don't know. I was just thinking of whatever could possibly fall in there.
But also, how do you describe the flavor of a spice?
It's complicated. It's not easy.
It sounds complicated.
He goes into detail more so of when you use it or why you would use it. Not so much because he actually does mention it's hard to explain what a spice tastes like. It's very difficult. One of the things that I've actually heard, and it wasn't through the book or Babish, it was just through, I think it was just through online or somewhere.
Probably Reddit.
Probably. People actually, in supposedly chefs, actually take spices and will take a little tiny piece of it and will put it in their mouth. And they literally just let it sit in like their gums or on their tongue, under their tongue or something like that. So that way they can fully taste the flavor of what it might add to the dish. It kind of works in the sense, and I thought that was insane when I first read that, by the way.
Well, I wouldn't want to just put a random spice on my tongue.
Right. I was like, imagine just eating garlic powder or something. Like, it sounds disgusting. But when you think of it in the context of, say, a sauce, it starts to make a lot more sense. You take a little bit of a sauce, you taste it individually, and you kind of learn how it would apply to the dish. Because us humans are super weird, and you can look at anything and you can know what it tastes like, right? Like, if you look at the wall, you can know what it feels like to lick the wall. Do you not? Maybe I'm insane.
I think you might be just a little insane.
I've heard that if you look at something, like if you look at that soda can right there and you imagine yourself licking that soda can, you know what it would feel like.
Okay, well, that's different because I drink out of the aluminum can.
All
so
right.
My tongue is already on the aluminum can, so I know what that tastes like.
You got me there.
But I'm not going to just lick the wall.
But you know, like, just think about it.
I am, and like I imagine it tastes like a wall.
Right, but can't you imagine it? Can't you like feel it? You know what I mean? Am I crazy?
You are crazy.
I swear other people have talked about this. If you're listening to this, do it yourself. Think of something, look at something, and see if you can taste it or you can feel what it would feel like to lick it.
Please don't actually lick your walls. That's weird.
No, please don't do that. But anyway, back to the book. The other really great part about the Babish book, and all this being said, I haven't even made any of the recipes yet, at least not officially out of the book. I have made some of his recipes before. One of the best parts is he goes into this troubleshooting stage where before you actually read the recipe, he tells you the things that he ran into and the problems that he had. And then on top of that, the problems that you might run into. You would say like, maybe it's too oily or it's too dry or it didn't puff up enough. Like whatever it might be, he has a little tidbit to explain where you went wrong or potentially went wrong, because there is a possibility of not getting any of those issues. So the other nice part is I believe every single recipe is also on his YouTube channel. So then he also has some troubleshooting steps there. So you can kind of learn both ways, or if you're more of a visual audio type of person, you can also get the information there. So it's really interesting. And so far, I was shocked that I had so much reading material inside of it to actually learn different things versus just pure recipes.
Well, that's good. I'm definitely excited to eat all of these creations.
Yes, and if anyone's curious, I'm starting with the rosemary focaccia.
I'm very excited for that. I love bread.
I'll give updates as I make the recipes, maybe.
I hope so. That'd be fun. A new segment. What's Joe cooking today?
What am I cooking and what am I reading on Wikipedia?
So, I would say cookbooks still count as reading. I mean, you're obviously reading it cover to cover.
Right.
But you're probably wondering what I am currently working through this week. And that's a couple of things. So I mentioned earlier that I'm in this new book club on Instagram called Myth of the Month. We are reading a book this month that is based on Hindu mythology. So this one is based off of the Ramayana, and it is called Kaikeyi, and it is by Vaishnavi Patel. For this book, she actually took the character of Kaikeyi from the Ramayana, and she reimagined her into a new light for this story. I don't know much about the Ramayana. I never had to learn about it in history classes in school, so I don't really know what it's about. But from what I gather, in a basic sense, Kaikeyi was the stepmother who banished Rama, and this book is kind of a retelling of that.
That's interesting. I mean, I did read it for my history class, so I am kind of aware of it. So I'm interested to hear from this perspective, knowing sort of the base story.
Yeah, so again, it is a lot for me to wrap my head around. I don't know why I keep making myself read all these big-brained books, but I do. And maybe it's making my brain bigger in the process.
Maybe.
So, Kaikeyi, the only daughter of the kingdom of Kaikeyi, Kaikeyi is raised on tales about the might and benevolence of the gods, how they churned the vast ocean to obtain the nectar of immortality, how they vanquish evil and ensure the land of Bharat prospers, and how they offer powerful boons to the worthy. Yet Kaikeyi watches as her father unceremoniously banishes her mother, listens as her own worth is reduced to the marriage alliance she can secure. And when she calls upon the gods for help, they never seem to hear her. Desperate for independence, she turns to the texts she once read with her mother and discovers a magic that is hers alone. With it, Kaikeyi transforms herself from an overlooked princess into a warrior, diplomat, and most favored queen. But as the evil from her childhood stories threatens the cosmic order, the path she has forged clashes with the destiny the gods have chosen for her family. And Kaikeyi must decide if resistance is worth the destruction it will wreak, and what legacy she intends to leave behind. So that was the Goodreads synopsis of this book. I would say that I am enjoying this book so far. However, it is moving a little bit slower for my liking, but I'm only on part 1 of the book. I just got to part 2 today, and I have heard from other people that it does pick up speed in part 2. So I am looking forward to continuing it. I'm not going to give up on it just because it is moving slow. Although I will say if it wasn't for a book club specifically, I would give up on it.
That's interesting that you mentioned part 1 and part 2, though, because I believe the traditional story also does 3 parts, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So kind of interesting that there's a link there. I like it.
Yeah, and this book is also including a lot of little anecdotes surrounding different myths and mythical creatures throughout. So I do think those are very interesting, but to me, it kind of feels like those anecdotes are sort of disjointed from the rest of the story that the author is trying to tell, because it will act like Kaikeyi is explaining the myth to the reader, and it's just a little boring for me.
I can see that for sure.
But they are still very interesting, and I'm intrigued to see what the author is going to do with part 2 of the book, because literally all of the Goodreads reviews say that this book is amazing and they're raving about it, and I'm like, I'm waiting to rave about it.
Yeah. When's the ball gonna drop?
So I will persevere, but it is very interesting, and I haven't actually read a book based on Hindu mythology before. So it's all brand new for me. And that was Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. Now, I know you are currently reading The Time of Contempt. Are you currently reading anything else? Or is there a book you are looking forward to reading very soon?
I'm looking forward, obviously, to the next book in the Witcher series, but I'm also planning on, I think I'm going to pivot from the Witcher series and read one of the books that are behind you right now, specifically the one called A Little Hatred. I'm read some reviews for it recently and everyone seems to love it, so I'm actually very excited to read it now.
That's good. Are you the kind of person who likes to take breaks from series as you're reading them, or do you kind of like to read like book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, like all in a row?
Normally, I like to read them all in a row, but for whatever reason with the Witcher series, I think it might just be because it's so long. I've already taken a couple of gaps on it or a couple of breaks on it, so it doesn't feel that weird to do it. It almost feels like I'm supposed to now.
That's how I feel with the Percy Jackson books. So I sound like a broken record at this point, but I am in a Percy Jackson buddy read on Instagram, as we have established in episodes 1, 2, and 3.
It's just a trend now. We always got to talk about it.
We just have to talk about it. I am so horribly behind on that buddy read now because I skipped reading The Titan's Curse for now because I wanted to read books that weren't Percy Jackson. But now I'm a whole book behind schedule and the buddy read is moving on to the 4th book. So I need to get the ball rolling on that again and read The Titan's Curse.
I can't remember that one. I don't remember if it was good or not.
I don't remember either. The last time I read Percy Jackson was probably when I was in middle school, which was a very long time ago.
I think that was about the same time that I read them. I think I reread them again in the beginning of high school, but you talking about them makes me want to reread them.
You should. They are very quick reads, actually, and reading them as an adult, I understand more of the wittiness that the author includes in them. Because I feel like as a kid, some of the jokes just fly over your head. But
yeah,
as an
definitely.
adult, you understand the jokes, and it's funny.
Maybe I will do that. Maybe I'll add that in. I'll sprinkle that in somewhere.
Now, do you understand how I feel when I just have piles and piles of books I want to read?
Yeah, when you're reading 4 books at the same time.
Yes, just because I can't wait to read them. I have to read them all at once. But then I usually end up just sticking to one, and then my Goodreads is all messed up and whatnot. And yeah.
I think that's the biggest difference between our reading habits is mine. I'm very much a 1 book at a time person, and you are like as many books as you can get going at once.
Listen, I'm not as bad as one of my friends. One of my friends reads 12 books at once.
That's just too many. That's impractical. Unless you're like somehow holding 2 books and reading both at the same time, I just can't imagine that that's practical.
Read one chapter from one book and then one chapter from another book. Just, keeps trading off.
You know how confusing that would be? It kind of seems like a fun challenge though, like force someone to do that and then they have to like retell the story.
I think they would go cross-eyed.
Probably. It just seems like a fun idea.
But the only reason I really do read multiple books at once is because I'm either, again, in buddy reads or I'm reading a book for a book club, but I also want to read a book of my choosing at the same time.
I think that's fair. You want to have something for your own or for yourself and then the buddy read or the partner read that you're doing.
Yes, exactly.
So I know you have been itching to talk about this book because you have been talking about it to me nonstop while also trying to not just spill all of the beans quite yet. So I'm ready for it.
Oh, you best be ready for it. This book is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn. And if you recognize the title, it is because it is the first of the Bridgerton series. Bridgerton is all of the rage right now on Netflix and social media. And literally everyone and their mother and their grandmother is talking about Bridgerton. Now, The Duke and I was my very first foray into the Bridgerton world. I've never seen the show. I haven't bothered to even look up what the show is about. We don't have a Netflix subscription, so there's been no interest because I literally can't watch it anyway. But now that I've read book 1, I'm like, maybe I need a Netflix subscription because it was so good. So if you are unfamiliar, The Duke and I is a Regency era romance. Bridgerton in general is just Regency era romance. So book 1 is Daphne's story. If you are unfamiliar with how Bridgerton works, basically each of the books is sort of about a different child in the Bridgerton clan, a different Bridgerton family member. And Daphne is of marrying age, but she can't seem to find a husband. And then we have Simon, who is the Duke of Hastings, and he doesn't want any female attention because he doesn't want to marry. He literally tells Daphne in the books that he never wants to get married. He never wants to have kids because for some strange reason, he just doesn't want to continue the Hastings legacy. He basically just wants his dukedom to die.
That's a bold stance to take.
Especially in the 1800s in London, England.
Yeah, that's like, killing off your family name, sort of.
Yes, but he sort of has good reason because his father was horrible to him, the first Duke of Hastings, or whatever number Duke he was of Hastings. And also, Simon already kind of knows the Bridgertons, but he doesn't know Daphne. He knows her brother, Anthony. Anthony has already kind of warned Daphne of Simon, and he's like, he's not a kind of guy that you want to marry. He's not a good person. He basically sleeps around. He goes from lady to lady, so you don't want to be associated with him. But lo and behold, Daphne and Simon run into each other at a ball that is specifically there so mothers can tote around their eligible marrying children and get them to meet ladies or fellows that they should marry. But they meet just in a dark hallway, so nobody knows that they've met. And they somehow decide to enter this false courtship because Daphne needs more male suitors. And she figures if she has a duke interested in her, all of the other guys are going to be interested in her because obviously a duke thinks she's so great and amazing. And Simon sees benefit in this because if he's involved with somebody, other ladies are going to stay away, essentially. However, during this courtship, this fake courtship, Daphne and Simon kind of start to fall for each other. At least Daphne is falling for Simon and Simon is just lusting after Daphne. Scandal erupts and Daphne and Simon have to get married because, it's 1813 in London, England. There are gossip papers and apparently somebody saw them getting frisky in somebody's garden. So they have to get married now because Daphne can't be seen as a woman who had relations with a man when she was unmarried, even though she was courting him. So basically, in modern terms, this is fake dating and marriage of convenience.
Is marriage of convenience like a book trope?
So it is a romance trope that basically means you get married because it will benefit each other. Like you're not getting married because you love each other.
So it's like getting married so you can file your taxes together or something?
I guess you could say that, yes. In Daphne and Simon's case, it was a marriage of convenience, so the rumors would stop.
Except now you have somebody who is in love with the other one and he is lusting over her.
Yes, but it's convenient in the way where the public eye will basically just turn their attention elsewhere because they are now married. And so, if they were seen doing whatever in somebody's garden, it's no longer considered a horrible thing because they are married.
Right. So now you're the creep for peeping on a married couple getting frisky versus you were getting some good juicy stories before.
Yes. So
that makes sense.
So the Regency era is actually very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of rules surrounding what women can do. Basically, all women had to be escorted by a male anywhere they went, is my understanding.
What is the Regency era?
The Regency era takes place from, I believe, I looked it up, from 1800 to the 1820s or 30s. It's the early 1800s is the Regency era.
Oh, that's not that long, actually. I thought it was going to be much longer than that.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I wouldn't exactly call it modern, but it is sort of before Victorian times. So I am really enjoying Bridgerton, and I already put book 2 on hold at the library, but I am second in line, so I'm not going to get it right away.
How many books are there?
There are 8 books.
Oh, wow.
Just in the Bridgerton family series. And then there's other series that Julia Quinn has created that sort of go along with Bridgerton. So it's like a whole slew of books.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like its own universe.
It is basically its own universe. So it's going to be fun diving into it, and I must watch the show now.
Yeah, gonna have to pay $27 or whatever they raised it to.
That's not happening. I'll just get the free trial and watch it for my free trial.
Binge it in 30 days.
I don't think it's even a 30-day free trial with Netflix anymore. I think it's 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so
I'm gonna just hold my tongue on my feelings for Netflix.
So that is what we are reading, what we have recently read, books we've enjoyed. And I'm looking forward to getting to more good books. But I didn't get a chance to ask you this earlier, but what are you obsessed with this week?
This week, I would have to say cooking, just sort of in general. That was kind of what spurred the idea to get the cookbooks. I've been watching a bunch of content lately, not just of the cookbook authors that I mentioned previously, but of a bunch of people in general. And it's always fun to fall down those rabbit holes of the cooking videos and things like that. But I particularly love when people give really good explanations and, more importantly, why they added what they added or use this technique or all that kind of stuff. So it's just been very kind of obsessed with reading about that recently. What about you? What have you been obsessed with?
Well, aside from Bridgerton, I have been obsessed with being outside, if that counts.
I guess I was obsessed with working out, now that I think about it. I did all my workouts last week.
I'm not obsessed with doing activities outside. I'm obsessed with just sitting outside.
That's fair. You do have that nice hammock.
I do have that nice hammock. The hammock that is currently put away because it's been so windy that's going to blow away.
That does hinder outside time.
It does hinder outside time, and I hate that basically every single nice day has been insanely windy.
Yeah, or those couple of weird days where we just had rain randomly when it was on a nice day.
Yeah, like, what's up with that? But I guess I would say I'm obsessed with the outside, just sitting on the porch. But this was another super fun episode.
I had a great time.
Yeah, I loved getting to know all about tacos. I loved getting to know about cooking and cookbooks and more about The Witcher. So that's always fun.
Absolutely. I liked hearing about the books you're reading, specifically The Familiar. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, you better go check it out of the library now because I need someone to explain to me what's happening in that book.
I'm going to have to read both of the ones you mentioned, When the Moon Hatched, too. That sounded very interesting.
They were both very, very good books. So I'm excited to chat more about books next week. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day and go read a good book. Happy reading!